Welcome to another edition of Drugs, Crime, and Politics, brought to you by the Drug Policy Forum of Texas. Good evening. I'm your host, Buford Terrell, and we've got a full room with us tonight. My colleague Clayton Jones is here.
How are you doing this evening?
From the Drug Truth Network and radio, we have Dean Becker.
Evening, all.
And our guest tonight, the Green Party candidate for Harris County Sheriff, Remington Alessi.
Thank you for having me.
Good to have you with us tonight. I've had a couple of things I wanted to run down that have been in the news lately. I think the first was last week. There was a raid on a farm in Tyler County, just north of here, where they claimed to have uprooted over 5,000 mature marijuana plants and said that there was a watering system involved. I think they said 2 people were arrested, but no more details.
And I also caught a blurb on from one of the broadcasters that talked about several hundred, if not thousand, of that 5,000 number were immature plants, 8 to 14 inches tall.
Okay, which means they had more than one crop going, probably.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, it reminded me of a historical thing that happened just a few miles from there. This was, I believe, close to Cut and Shoot in 1947 or 1948. And that's when William Burroughs, the boat-beat novelist that wrote Naked Lunch, decided he was going to grow marijuana, moved down, rented a farm, planted 150 acres in marijuana. His plan was to harvest it and sell it to the workers at the Port of Houston. But when the crop got ripe, a lot of his friends showed up. They cut the first buds, got a little bit too high, went out and harvested the rest, and put the wet buds into screw-top mason jars.
Oh, boy.
Loaded them into the trunk of the car and drove to New York to sell to their friends. And the entire crop went bad before they could sell it.
Smelled like rotten ammonia at that point, I'm sure. Yes, yes.
Wow.
Well, as an aside, I'd like to say this, that 12 years ago, I was growing weed up near Hempstead, Texas.
Okay.
It grew up to 26 feet tall. Mm-hmm. And the one thing I've noticed that since we don't have a hard freeze in this part of Texas anymore, or not much of one, that a person would be well served to plant again in September, let it grow through the winter and into the next spring and get a harvest.
I would say that the season here would support a 2-crop
right.
cycle.
Much like in Columbia, where they do it in that fashion.
Yeah. Well, the other somewhat local thing, about the same time, the DEA pulled a nationwide raid on distributors and manufacturers of so-called bath salts.
Right. And the fake marijuana.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of these analog drugs.
Yes.
And one of the biggest manufacturing labs they found was in Rosenberg.
Right. Well, that caught them by surprise. They went there thinking it was a distributor.
Yeah.
Found out it was the manufacturer. I learned that from my interview with Dane Schiller of the Houston Chronicle this past weekend.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's amazing that there is such a distribution network set up. They said these were not high-end players. There was no major gang involved. These were just people who saw a dollar sign and followed it.
And
the demand is there.
Well, especially...
Actually, I'm not sure it is.
I think because of this prohibition of drugs in general, it has created this niche market, if you will.
Well, that's the thing. If marijuana were legal and readily available, and if the stimulants like the amphetamines and cocaine were available, I think this bath salt crap would all but disappear from the market.
Sure.
I mean, after all, let's take 2 others that hit, or 3 others that hit rather hard about 20 years ago. And that was PCP, ketamine, and gamma hydroxybutyrate, GHB.
Yeah.
Those all were pretty dangerous drugs. They hurt a lot of people, and You still hear about them occasionally, but the word got out on the market that this is something you don't need.
Right. It's a very minuscule market compared to what it was now. I think that brings to mind that with every step taken, with every measure, with every effort that this drug war seeks to accomplish, it creates a myriad of additional problems that push is never going to solve.
You know, it's never going to be solved until we actually legalize drugs. Let's face it. Look at what's happening in Sweden. They just closed another prison. They don't have enough people to fill them. They stopped prosecuting drug users. They closed another prison. Look at Portugal. 12 years after they decriminalized personal use of marijuana or all drugs.
All drugs.
Their prisons are very light. Their percentage of crime has gone way down. It's there. It's shown us all over the world.
And their children's use of drugs is about 50% of what it is in these United States under prohibition.
Why? Because people get the truth.
Well, and here we have, the sad thing is, we have drug gangs selling drugs to our children, enticing our children to make money because there's so few jobs available, to sell drugs to their friends, the other children, and that's how it gets distributed more into.
This was something that struck me recently, and this was looking at, and this may have been in some of David Kennedy's work, but if you look at what goes on with the street-level drug deals in major cities, especially street-level crack dealers more than anything.
Street corner.
Most of these guys do not even make minimum wage out of it, and high numbers of them are still living at home with mama because they don't make enough money to even support themselves. It's the kind of thing that we've, in a lot of ways, got a wrong picture about what goes on.
Well, wasn't that the numbers that you're quoting about being below minimum wage? Wasn't that the stuff from Levitt and I forget the other guy's name, the guys who wrote Freakonomics, and I thought that had to do with the
they've been doing some
80s era crack market.
Well.
I was curious about that because one of the things I've noticed in studying a lot of this is it's really hard to pin down accurate figures, obviously.
True.
But all these figures got to come out of the air. If you go to the DEA, a bag of marijuana is going to be worth $10,000 when you and I will know it's only worth a half a pound, 3,200.
Well, that's okay. See, I don't even know what the prices are. It's been the irony of this is, for as much as I am totally in favor of ending the war on drugs, I actually don't do them. But funny thing is, you know, I mean, I don't think you have to be black to be against slavery either, and you know, so basically, I guess what I catch myself wondering about is, you know, if you approach it with the figures a lot with say a methodological perspective, and that's something that I've focused on pretty heavily is research methodology. I've found that there's a great deal of research that is really not very comprehensive on both sides. And it seems to me that when we get into these finer points, we're completely neglecting something that is far simpler, which is basically that we should have learned from Prohibition, but policy-wise, it seems that our politicians have not. And that's the fundamental issue, is if someone, conversely during Prohibition, if I recall correctly, the UK raised taxes and found that their cirrhosis rates went down as opposed to the U.S. where it went up, and people started drinking more concentrated alcohols, and beer and wine sales pretty much disappeared. The whole idea is this black market, it doesn't work, and I imagine that there's probably not anything that I can, you know, list off that's actually going to be new information for anybody in this room or anybody who's watching this show. But it seems to me a very simple issue, and when we start getting into a lot of these details, it pushes us on the defensive argument from the perspective of this being, say, an argument, in that we're defending our points when there's a very core and very simple issue, which is that I do not have a right to tell you what you can and cannot consume. I would prefer if you didn't consume, say, cyanide, but that's not for me to say.
Not your call.
Let me interrupt here for two things. First, I want to remind everyone that this is your show. We want you to contribute. We want you to guide where we're going. So if you've got anything to comment or say, please call us using the number on the screen, and we will respond to you as best we can. If you're not watching us on the live broadcast, you can email me at the email address shown, and I'll respond to you, and we'll get back to you, maybe use your comment on the next show. And the other, I want to point out that Remington Alessi is running for Harris County Sheriff on the Green Party ticket, and he's making these comments from the standpoint of someone actually participating in the game. And as I understand it, you have 1 degree in criminal justice and are also studying economics. Is that right?
Yes, and you'd be amazed at how much overlap there is between the two.
No, I would.
Becoming more
well,
evident
yeah,
every
actually,
day.
I forget who I'm talking to. Most of the time, I probably should have brought it with me, but I have one of the orange shirts from the county jail.
Yeah.
And what most people don't notice is that there's a little tag in the back, and it says Bob Barker Industries. No relation to the Price is Right guy. Okay. But the thing is, I oftentimes use that as a visual aid to explain to people the economics of criminal justice.
Yeah.
That Bob Barker Enterprises obviously wants to sell more orange shirts, and given that they only allow those guys to do laundry once a week, they have to have a lot of prisoners to sell more shirts.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating because when you look into basic economic issues, even like how incentives affect human behavior, we've essentially created an entire system by which the drug war is partly driven by a massive industry that benefits from having more and more people incarcerated and creating repeat customers for the criminal justice system, when in fact the good of society depends upon us doing exactly the opposite. But also there's probably
that brings me up to 2 other questions.
Oh, yes.
The first, I don't know if you noticed a week or so ago, the governor of New Jersey, Chris Christie, was appearing on a news show and was advocating switching from incarceration to treatment for drug addicts, and pointed out that in New Jersey it was costing $49,000 a year to imprison and $24,000 a year for in-house therapy. That's a net savings of $25,000 a head for the state.
Well, yeah, and what it comes down to, there's a certain corruption of our government that occurs because of moneyed interests exerting disproportionate power over various actions of government. And therein lies the rub. I mean, we've got pharmaceutical industry, private prison industry getting involved in this whole thing. And I've made it a central point to be focused on, hey, I'm here to end the war on people.
Okay. We have a call.
Oh, yes.
Good evening, caller. Are you there?
Hello.
Hello.
Turn down your TV.
Turn your TV down.
Yes,
It'll confuse all of us.
Do you have a question or comment?
Yeah.
Yeah, share with us.
What does Remington plan on doing if he gets elected as sheriff?
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Good question.
Well, my days are going to be filled, to start with. Obviously, one of the first things that we're going to have to do is we're going to have to completely deprioritize nonviolent drug arrests, to the extent that, hey, you know what? If you're peacefully getting high in your house, that the police are not the moral police. We don't. The sheriff's department is not there to make sure that you obey the 10 Commandments as far as, honoring thy father and mother, and therefore
Excuse
has
me,
no other.
I'm looking through the Texas statutes. I don't find that in the law book.
Right. That's but my issue there is being the moral police is not something that law enforcement should be throwing resources at. It's a waste. Yeah. It's an absolute waste.
But that's the way our laws are made right now.
Right. Yeah. But going into that, I'm probably going to face an uphill battle with Commissioner's Court, and as far as I'm concerned, I'll wake up every morning full of anger and spite and take it out on them, because we've got people like Commissioner Steve Raddick, who's trying very hard to get the Harris County Jail privatized by having it taken over by.
How much stock does he have in? The
what kind of kickback is he got?
I mean,
I'm sure I would like to invite anyone who's listening to see if they can find those figures out, because I would be very interested in finding them out, but I imagine that they're well guarded.
Or go to a county commission meeting and ask him to his face.
Mm-hmm. Hey, why don't we do that?
I did have
another
question I wanted to ask you about economics and law.
Mm-hmm.
If we look at what's going on across the country, we've had several cities lately declare bankruptcy. We have had other cities that have had to cut back on police forces, or police pay, fire pay.
Libraries.
Yeah. And what effect do you see this economic squeeze on city law enforcement and public safety budgets having on law enforcement, particularly when we're talking with things like, I know one police chief where the city went into bankruptcy said, "We assure you that if you call 911, a first responder will be there. We assure you that we will investigate and solve violent crimes and go after the prosecutors." And then he stopped.
Mm-hmm.
What effects do you see happening with this economic situation?
It's very difficult to say, and that's something that that is going to require that people be willing to hold their local legislators accountable.
Mm-hmm.
For example, to make sure that that Mayor Parker and the City Council don't throw money at, say, giving Walmart $6 million worth of tax cuts, mm-hmm. and then pulling $41 million out of the HISD. I mean, that's a thing. Yeah. Ultimately, I can do some things in order to lighten the budget by implementing policies that will effectively combat mass incarceration, the war on drugs, and things like that. But I can't do it by myself. Yeah. I'm certainly going to do my best to make a difference, and I'm going to have to go out swinging, and I absolutely will. And the nice thing is I've got a certain amount of freedom. I'm not interested in joining the good old boys club or going and playing golf with some of these guys.
To me, the nice thing is you're putting on the table and making public some of these issues that nobody wants to talk about.
Well, nobody wants to talk about them because they're being paid not to talk about them. And but these are things that oftentimes, like the war on drugs, I suspect that there are many people who discuss this over dinner, and it's an issue that they think is absolutely ridiculous. Now, whether or not it's ridiculous enough to them to justify interrupting Dancing with the Stars and coming out and marching is a different story. But really, if given the option, I think people will come out, especially given the amount of discontent at the two-party system that's emerged especially over the last year within the Occupy movement. But
Clayton has pointed out to me a couple of times that Philadelphia, acting as a city within what the state law allows them to do, switched from arresting people for misdemeanor marijuana possession to giving them a citation like a traffic ticket, so that they show up in court 3 days later. And you said the savings was what, $3 million a year?
Yes.
But we have a situation in Texas that's already in place that could do much the same as that.
What is required is for the mayor and the
district attorney to make use of it.
and the county judge to say, do it.
Well, unfortunately, you've got a lot of people in the DA's office who, like the gentleman who's replacing Pat Lykos won the Republican primary. I think it's been suggested.
Sheer disaster, people.
Yeah, it's been
Johnny
suggested
Holmes
to me
and what's his face, Redux.
Rosenthal.
Well, it's been suggested to me that that Anderson has more business being a prison guard than a DA. And the thing is, these guys, these get tough on crime people, they're wasting your tax dollars.
Yeah.
They're wasting your tax dollars because they seem to think that they can justify spending police resources on, frankly, I don't see any point in even issuing citations. No. Why are the police responding to something as silly as a funny smell that a neighbor is complaining about?
Let's take a break and we'll come back and talk about that some.
Very good.
Well, since that last break brought up the Caravan for Peace, and since Dean is going to go out and rough it for many weeks and go along the whole route, why don't you tell us a little bit about it?
I'd like to. Thank you, Buford. Yeah, the map that showed up there, you know, maybe you couldn't read it. It starts in San Diego, goes to L.A., Phoenix, Tucson, Las Cruces, all across Texas, El Paso, Harlingen, Houston, Austin, San Antonio, goes through New Orleans, Chicago, Cleveland, New York, Baltimore, and Washington, D.C., a total of 25 cities in about 30-something days.
May I suggest that route looks like a straight line drawn by someone who had a little bit too much weed?
Well, maybe so, but, you know, the fact of the matter is that's going to involve, I hear now it's 120 people coming from Mexico, going to be loaded in 3 buses, come across from Tijuana into San Diego, where they're going to be met by contingents of the NAACP, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, and about a half dozen other drug reform-minded organizations here in the United States. The Mexican contingent is led by Mexican poet Javier Sicilla, who has led 3 or 4 similar caravans within Mexico, which I think he's the bravest man I know for having done so. And but this will be about 30 days, end on September 11th in Washington, D.C. Okay. And this is going to be a chance for people, at least across the southern part of the country, to show their awareness of this problem, to show this need for change, and to speak up, to let the politicians know how they feel. I think the big problem right now is that too many people are afraid to speak up, are afraid to share what they know with their neighbors, friends, relatives. Even more importantly, they have done the one thing that leaves politicians thinking they believe in drug war, and that is to remain silent. 50 words written to your elected officials, to the local newspaper, to anybody in authority that runs or is aware of this problem.
Now, I have to ask, I'm sorry to interrupt,
No,
but
please, go ahead, Remington.
I've never gotten the impression that those letters to legislators actually do anything.
Well, I think the numbers are so small that they're not doing anything. The fact of the matter is, if everyone who believes the drug war to be a failure were to just write 50 words, put it in an email and send it to 15 people.
Actually,
I thought it required a lobbyist with $1 million or more to get them to read those.
Well, you may be right.
And especially at the state level, but to some extent even at the federal level. Don't email it. Actually see if somewhere in your house there's a piece of paper and a ballpoint pen.
Well, true. Handwritten.
Write it out by hand, sign it, put it in an envelope, go buy a stamp if you have to, and send it regular mail. Someone in that representative's office will read it and enter it in kind of a tally count ledger, put it in a file, and if that issue comes up for any discussion in the legislature or vote, they will go through the stacks of for and against with the representative before he has to do anything on it. And so, especially if you put it in paper form where it becomes part of that stack, it has some effect.
Oh, sure. It would have more
Emails get
impact.
counted and some of them read.
Well,
Please, the main thing I was wanting to say is that through your silence, you're counted as endorsing the drug war, and that's what I was trying to relay. Go ahead,
yeah,
please.
wasn't it Desmond Tutu that said something along the lines of, in times of injustice, those who choose inaction are siding with the oppressors? And I agree with that. I guess I just worry about what would be effective. Like, for example, you know, there's a lot of credence being given to spreading awareness. You know, like basically update your Facebook status, and then you feel like you've done your part. But the issue there is, I often wonder if that acts as a pressure valve to keep people from doing more effective things. And ultimately, the issue here, though, is with regards to dealing with politicians. I want to bring up a little parallel. Let's say I work for you guys. Okay, well, technically, as a government official, I would. If I'm elected, then I work for you guys, as well as everybody else in the county. But let's say it's a simpler job. Let's say I'm just a clerk.
Okay.
If one of you asks me to do something reasonable, send an email or something like that, nothing particularly controversial. Obviously, I should be expected to say, sure, absolutely, I'll take care of that immediately. If instead I responded, you're going to have to make me. I'm not going to, by golly, I'm not going to do it. And you know what? Now that I think of it, I'm just going to ignore you until you literally force me to stop ignoring you. I would not have my job very long. And that remains true with everything except elected officials. They can do a terrible job, and all they have to do is get a press agent to spin it and pretend like they aren't digging their heels in.
Don't get me started on this, which is totally off the topic. But you're not going to change that until we take redistricting away from the politicians. 50, 60 years ago, someone once said that war is too important to be left to the generals. Districting is too important to be left to the politicians. Politicians should not be allowed to choose the voters that they want, which is what happens with the way districting is done now.
Well, that's the other thing. I mean, you know, when part of the reason that I brought up that analogy is, you know, let's suppose that as your employee, I said, oh, okay, you want me to do something simple like send an email, do the right thing? Here's what I want you to do. I want you to take something down, handwrite it in triplicate, go get it notarized, and submit it across town with the mail it, stuff like that. Go through a whole bunch of hoops. Obviously,
and
you would be like, that's ridiculous. and that's the thing is, if voters are finding themselves having to handwrite a letter that ultimately is going to be ignored unless we literally fill their office with letters, it seems to me that there may be more effective things to do. Like, for example, fire them.
Listen, we all know that there isn't a damn one of these elected officials that are really trying to do something for you. They are trying to do things for themselves.
Well,
they are building their
stock portfolio, if
yes.
Well, right now, frankly, for practically any office in the country, I would vote for anyone who would stand up with a straight face and say, I sell insurance for a living, or I'm a lawyer, or I drive a truck. I want to go to Austin or Washington for 2 years. Then I want to get back to driving my truck again.
Yeah. Instead of a career.
Samuel Adams once said, when vain and it was something along the lines of, when vain and aspiring men hold the highest office, our country
Well, John
would be in
Adams,
great,
I don't know
great
about
danger.
that as well as anybody.
No, it was Sam Adams. But
Okay.
yeah, the thing is, yeah, these career politicians I wonder at. I mean, frankly, it's funny because I've talked to my wife about this. She's a little bit peeved at me for running for office because and the reason being, I personally would rather just finish up my schooling, go get my PhD, and go be a professor. But I kind of look at this whole race as being like,
not a bad life.
well, yeah, yeah, that's the thing. I mean, we'd rather go have a family, but ultimately, it seems to me that there's a certain amount of civic duty involved in this.
Phone call.
Oh,
Good deal.
Hello, caller. You're on the air.
Yes, I had a question for Remington.
Okay.
uh-oh.
Yeah, as sheriff, I was wondering how you planned on dealing with the crooked cops and,
Okay, thank you. We'll let him try to answer that.
Good. Can I drop
That
in?
is,
Develop your answer. This morning there was 3 stories about police shootings in Houston, and that we have double the police shootings of the rest of the state here in Houston. But please, go ahead.
Well, it is a very complex issue. Number one, we need to have tamper-proof cameras at all times on officers.
Hear, hear.
And that protects the officers as well as the people who oftentimes become their victims, unfortunately.
And as I understand it, the technology is such that we could put a little
also,
clip on their shoulder, a little
yeah.
box
Also,
on the
they've
belt
got.
that
we
would
would
wire
have
it
to
in.
make it so they couldn't shut it off.
Oh, that's right. It
Well,
would be
that's
on
why
there.
I said tamper-proof. But the thing is, they've also got cameras all over the county jail, and those guys get out of control. We need to have recording and archive it. Something along those lines will allow the department to very quickly get rid of these bad actors, because if they aren't willing to treat their responsibility as a grave responsibility, as public servants who are there to serve and protect, if instead they decide that they are going to continue to be bullies, then they're perfectly welcome to find themselves a new job, at which point we've got a job market that would completely support bringing in younger, talented people who are more interested in actually doing the right thing. Now, the one thing, though, is, and some people get a little bit upset at me with this, it seems to me that, and this same should be done with public school teachers, that if you're going to increase standards, you also have to increase compensation. But one of the things is, it seems to me that we'll be able to save a lot of money by getting rid of some of the bad actors, because how much money do these guys cost the county in lawsuits when they decide that they're going to go beat somebody up?
Let me throw another answer into the pot here. And this is, let's take the drug money out of the equation. That if you, and we can pick numbers all over the place. One of the more recent ones I have seen is that the annual drug price in the United States is about $60 billion a year. All of the drugs are dirt cheap. That $60 billion is 90% or so profit. A lot of that profit is spent to avoid going to jail. If you've got a cop making $40,000 a year and someone offers him $20,000 to let a truck drive across town, he's going to do it.
Absolutely. And that's pretty well known. Is if you underpay these guys, they're going to get corrupt, because that's their only way of making money.
Another caller, please. We've got another call. Hello, caller. You're on the air.
Yeah, I'd just like to make a comment.
Okay.
I was listening to your show and the topic, and the thing about dealing with corrupt cops and politicians or dirty cops is the good cops turn their head and, they don't see what's going on. They don't speak up against the corrupt cops. It's like a brotherhood.
It is.
Good cops spoke out against corrupt cops.
Well, that same thing was found. I think that exact thing came up in Philip Zimbardo's study, in the early '60s with the Stanford prison experiment. That most of these guys nobody wants to stand up against the bully.
Well, a lot of it is the us against them thing too.
That's certainly a dynamic.
If you feel like you're encircled by an enemy army, your camaraderie and support for each other becomes the most crucial thing you do. So that's part of it.
Yeah, and then there's just the fear factor that speaking up too loudly about a current situation could get you axed, could get your family hurt.
Or
It happens
possibly
all.
get you shot.
Yes, it happens all too often.
Yeah.
So
Look at that. About a month ago, we had that tractor trailer came up from the border,
Harlingen, yeah.
and the narcs were all following the thing. And
It was a DEA informant driving a truck
Yes.
he borrowed from his boss.
Yes, he didn't borrow it from his boss. He was a DEA agent, informant, before he got the job. And once he got the job, he was going down to the border delivering sand. He drove over 1,000 miles of unauthorized driving by his employer. He was being paid by his employer. There was $198,000 damage done to the truck.
Let me put it simply. We can describe what happened there in 4 words. DEA stole the truck.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now they do not want to pay for the damages.
Well, and for those who may not know, I don't know if this was included, the fact of the matter is this informant was hauling a load of marijuana
For the DEA.
For the DEA, and what happened was another cartel heard there was a load of marijuana in Houston, tried to stop the truck, killed the driver, and I don't think they got the weed, but they dispersed.
No, they
the
didn't.
DEA had absolutely no authority to take this truck owner who was in Dallas, to take his truck, put it to their own use for their own purposes, and destroy it. That's thievery.
And how much was the cost to repair the truck after the shooting?
$198,000.
That's downtime, lost time, and bullet holes and blood throughout the vehicle.
Yeah, they had to replace the interior.
And this is all because the government is favoring one cartel over the other?
Exactly right.
No, I will at least back the DEA up to this point. That I don't think they knew the hijacking was going to take place.
I don't think so either.
What they were doing was they were simply trying to set it up, sort of a gun walking in reverse, to track the marijuana load from Mexico to wherever it was going and line up the purchasers. And Dean brought some visual aids along.
Yeah, we're talking about the
cartel
infiltration of the Mexican cartels. This is a map I got off the internet the other day. I hope you can zoom in on it some, but this shows the infiltration of the Mexican cartels into major U.S. cities. Some 300 plus gangs that are either aligned with or are part of these Mexican drug cartels. And this is just an example of how wrong this drug war is.
Well,
we have empowered our terrorist enemies, enriched these barbarous Latin cartels, and we give reason for more than 30,000 violent gangs to be prowling our neighborhoods.
I would change your drawing a little.
All right.
That drawing showed each of those lines as an arrow coming from Mexico. I would draw them instead as great big soda straws sucking things up from Mexico into Chicago or St. Louis or wherever.
That's one thing. You know, of all the cartels, there's one that scares me the most. And I believe their name is the DEA. They've obviously been complicit in a lot of this. I mean, if you really get into some of the deals that have gone down in Latin America, you know, purchasing cocaine from some of these.
Well, let me give you some history here. In the 13 years that alcohol prohibition existed, over 30% of all of the federal revenue agents were fired, made to resign, or convicted of corruption charges. In the mid-1930s, the Secretary of the Treasury had to intervene because the New York office, the biggest office in the Prohibition Bureau, Drug Prohibition Bureau at the time, was thoroughly corrupt, and he ended up firing over a third of the agents then. And then again in the 1970s, another shakeup in what was then the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs led to another massive, more than 30% firing. And the irony of that one was, a week after they fired all of those agents, the head of the Miami office himself was busted for corrupt activity.
Wow. Well, and that's what it comes down to.
They're saying let's take another break, so we'll be back in a couple of minutes.
The whole idea of a drug-free America and zero tolerance really doesn't make much sense, does it? So it does make sense, however, to find ways to reduce the harms associated with drugs. And that's what I want to talk about.
To start thinking about whether it is really laws that make the difference on whether people use drugs or not.
Al Capone didn't shoot people because he was intoxicated.
Right, exactly.
Those people are not fighting over drugs. They're fighting over money.
Drug laws have no basis in science. Drug laws are based on politics and money.
So there's this unholy symbiosis between, on the one hand, those who are selling illegal drugs, the drug lords, if you will, and on the other side, the drug warriors.
War on drugs isn't working, and that, if anything, it's just making what we call the drug problem a lot worse.
Yes, I just left a message to encourage Congressman Smith to allow H.R. Bill 2306 on the floor.
You know, I say that, Rick Perry.
We're back, and I might reintroduce our rather large panel. Most of you know Clayton Jones, who's with me, Dean Becker of the Drug Truth Network, and Remington Alessi, the Green Party candidate for Harris County Sheriff. And we've just been kind of going all over the place tonight. So if you have questions that you want to drop into the mix, please call us at the phone number.
There's one thing I did want to touch on that it is basically the issue of holding elected officials accountable. I mean, and you know, it kind of goes into that whole writing the letter thing. Every 2 to 4 years, we have the ability to collectively wake up in the morning and check whether or not the people who represent us should be fired.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is where we need to exert control. Now, we obviously have issues with the Electoral College and a number of other issues with, say, the two-party system, and the manner in which the two major parties have.
You know, there's one thing that's probably a great citizen aid, and I don't use it enough myself, but once a week the Houston Chronicle runs a column that says how Texans voted. And in that they record every vote taken in Congress and how every Texas representative or senator voted on every issue. Now, if you're really serious about it, a whole lot more serious than I am, you would keep those, and every time before you went to the polls, you'd check and see just how that guy has been representing you.
I don't know. Generally, I think we can all go, if they're in office, get them the hell out and get somebody else in there that's going to do something better.
The one-term candidate, like you were talking about, somebody.
Yes.
The problem there is every time I start thinking that, there is some guy that hung around forever
and did a good job.
Kept doing let's say, a C+ job. For instance, I think would be a whole lot worse off if Barney Frank had been sent home several terms earlier.
Yeah.
Even an old crotchety guy that I disagree with on most things, I think most of his time in the Senate, Robert Byrd did more good than he did harm. It took Teddy Kennedy 20 years to grow up into the job where he could do something good. You can't say even Everett Dirksen to go to the other side of the fence.
See, I would suggest that we've been falling behind on our job of keeping them accountable to where we have amassed so much garbage in our government that it seems insurmountable, to where our standards are lowered to the point at which we occasionally are thrilled with the rare individual who is capable, after 20 years, of growing into the job and doing a C+ job.
I'll admit radical pruning is needed.
Yeah.
But I just can't quite say throw all the bums out, because some of them aren't really bums.
I think that's true. There are a few here and there, but I've probably got a little bit higher standards than you. Like Frank, for example, the damage that he and Chris Dodd have done to the financial regulatory bill.
That bill was a total disaster. Or not total disaster, because I think it was marginally better. It was an attempt to salvage the wreck that the Bush administration had caused on bank regulation. It didn't go near far enough.
Well, yeah. I mean, if they really wanted to do anything, I mean, Chris Dodd, you don't really actually think that he's got any vested interest in regulating anything. He was the scumbag who made all that money off of what, Countrywide Home Loans?
Yeah.
You know, it's he and that guy Mozilla or whatever. These guys, for all intents and purposes, would be criminals, but for the fact that they occupy some sort of legislative office.
To carve out an exception.
Can I drop something in here? Yeah. In the last couple of weeks, HSBC Bank was found to be complicit. Well, they haven't been convicted yet, but complicit nonetheless in laundering. I think it was $14 billion so far, dollars for the cartels, for terrorists, for gangs, international gangs. This is just another example. You reach back, 4 or 5 years ago, it was Wachovia Bank that laundered $340 billion for the Mexican drug cartels. And what was it, BCI? Was that the bank scandal from the 90s?
BBCI.
Yeah, and they were laundering money for the cartels. And it only makes me wonder, well, if HSBC is no longer doing it, which bank is? And the fact of the matter is...
all of them.
Yeah, all of them. And the fact of the matter is, for Wachovia, $340 billion laundered. They got fined $140 million. Like way less than 1/10% of what they earned. No one was arrested. No one went to jail. And
it won't.
Well, the problem is people don't. The people who make the rules to benefit themselves, rather than sticking with the old adage. I don't recall who said it originally, but it was if you're in charge of making the rules, you should write the rules as though you do not know whether or not you will be on top or on the bottom.
That's
who was that?
John Rawls, the Harvard philosopher, whose theory of justice came out about 35, 40 years ago.
Okay, sometimes
he was the one that came up with this, writing the rules from the position of ignorance.
Yeah, and that sort of thing. If we really get into it, I mean, that's what's wrong, and the fact that we aren't holding our people accountable.
If we look, for instance, at one of the few government agencies that I think really scores pretty high most of the time, that's the General Accountability Office. Used to be the Government Accountability Office, where their job is simply to go around and audit and report on what all of the other agencies do. What we need is a professional oversight bureau whose only job is to audit and report on what the members of Congress do. If we got reports on each congressman every year, like we got from GAO about how the post office buys trucks, it might make an amazing difference.
We better not let the Republicans critique themselves.
That's why I say it has to be very carefully isolated from the Congress itself.
That's why, the problem, though, is I think, to use kind of a parallel, I get the impression that the higher the garbage piles, the harder it is to find inspiration to actually clean it up, and I think that's where we are right now, and now more than ever, we actually need to pay attention to that.
House Republican majority leader that was blocking passage of the budget and the debt ceiling raise.
Yeah, John Boehner.
But at the same, not John Boehner, the Virginia congressman, not the speaker of the majority. What?
Cantor?
Cantor.
Yeah.
At the same time, he was actively blocking raising the debt ceiling. He was short selling bank stocks.
I want to know where our government has now gotten the money to support 3 battalions in Africa for drug interdiction. And I want to know, why are we in Africa?
We're to stop South Americans from selling drugs to Europeans. That's why we're in Africa.
That never comes close to...
Well, how are we making money on that? We've got to be making money on it.
Let me clarify. We are not making money off of that. There is a small percentage of the population, affectionately known of as the 1%, who makes money off of doing that. Everybody else gets...
This one's even simpler than that. With sequestration, which is looking more and more likely, and with comments that the administration is making, the Department of Defense is looking at rather severe budget cuts, which means the Army might get smaller, the Marines might get smaller. So we're getting an in-house fight within the Defense Department about who gets the biggest pieces of the shrinking pie. And if the Army can add 3 battalions in Africa, that means, we've got more men, so we need more money. But I notice they've also just decided they're going to put another group of men out working with local law enforcement on roadside bombs, because they're the explosive device experts. The Marines have done something the same way. They're sending another group.
And let me guess, they're planting roadside bombs because they're jealous of how free we are. Is that what how they're still spinning?
No, they're thinking that there have been a couple of explosive devices lately, but what they're saying is, oh, look at us, this is an essential element. You can't cut our budget on this point.
Yes, but we're getting thrown out of South American countries on our drug interdiction.
Okay, we don't have enough people down there. That's another reason for shipping them to Africa.
because we can't deal with the production that's too great for us to deal with, so we'll wait until they ship it over there and it's all condensed.
Well, it's not coming from Africa to here anyway, which we're about to run out of time here. We've got, I think, 4 minutes left, so why don't we go around the circle, start with Remington, and everybody have a last quick say of a minute or so.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess I haven't really gotten to talk about the law enforcement policy a great deal, but this has been an interesting conversation. I've actually enjoyed listening more than talking, but anyway, if anybody's interested in checking out RemingtonForSheriff.com, yes, I'm real. Yes, I exist. No, I am not one of those silly suits who's owned by corporations. And yes, you can vote for me in November. No joke. So, check it out, RemingtonForSheriff.com, and shoot me an email. Okay. Or shoot me some, well, I certainly wouldn't mind any sort of help we can with the campaign.
If you're running for law enforcement, I'm not sure shoot me is the best language to use.
Yeah. Okay. Please send me an email at Remington@RemingtonForSheriff.com. Okay. I read all the email, and I'm very much open to listening to any suggestions that anybody in the community has.
And Dean, at least tell us where we can find you.
Okay, well, I urge you to please check out my radio shows, which are Sunday nights at 6:30 p.m. on KPFT, which is 90.1 FM. This week I'll be talking to Ethan Nadelman about the upcoming Caravan for Peace, some other good information. But mostly I just want to say this, that you are the answer. We have examined this, spent thousands, tens of thousands of hours learning the truth about this drug war. You know the truth, or you have intuition that this truth is real. Please verify it. Show your support and help it to bring it to an end.
You know, we all need to just start standing up and telling these people that say they represent us that really don't. That we need to get rid of a lot of these people that are in office. We need new blood in our state legislation. We need new blood in the Congress. If they're in office, I personally say vote them out because they're on some kind of a deal to get themselves rich.
I was pleasantly surprised the other day to find out this show has been on Houston Media Access longer than any other show they have.
Yes.
We're starting, I believe, our 12th year now. I've been with it a while. I've been involved with drug laws for about 20 years. When I first started out, I was sure marijuana was going to be legal within 5 years. The time scale kind of slipped, but I'm starting to get some enthusiasm and some excitement again. I think the time for major changes are coming, but it's up to you. We can suggest, we can even pretend we're leading, but it's up to you, all of you out there, to make the changes happen. So please work with us, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks' time. And thank you, everybody, for being here with us tonight.
Thanks, Buford.
Thanks. It's been an honor.
We have these private prisons that have now hired lobbyists to go get minimum mandatories in you.
I began to understand that the 17 or the 19-year-old kid I had in the backseat of my police car was not a criminal at all.
Remove the profit motive. If you remove the profit motive, you can do away with almost all these problems. And how do you do that? Simple. Damn prohibition, which can only mean one thing. Legalize drugs. Legalize oral drugs.
If we really want to improve our urban neighborhoods, the most important thing that we could do, the single most important thing that we could do, is end the war on drugs.